revolutionize our battery technology, and I think that it will. I think that it's the very clear path that, Eric, when he was introducing me to some of the concepts he's been working on, there was a video, and it describes, that we are soon to be in an era very similar to how we had the Stone Age and the Iron Age and the Bronze Age, and we live in the plastics age and maybe the silicon age. We are entering into the graphene age, and it is going to change everything. It's going to make so many of the things that we rely on, it is going to completely replace them. So it's a very interesting thing, and we're all standing here at the very beginning of it, and who knows what this is all going to look like when it's all said and done. It's very interesting stuff, though. Yeah.
What's the recyclability and reuse of graphene? Since it's just carbon, is it just form a different material with it?
Yeah, it's the same concept. You essentially just have to break the existing bonds and reform it into create a process that will assist it to form in the state that you want it to.
So that would be like a chemical recycling?
A lot of them are right now, it's very similar to, any new technology. Right now we're hitting it with a hammer, right? It's like we're throwing everything we can at it. We're trying to break it, and a lot of that is chemicals. They're using, a lot of different techniques, but yes, most of it is dirty, inefficient, really ineffective. It's not ready yet for large scale production, like manufacturing. Right now it's so expensive to make that it's not quite there yet, but I would bet anything that almost any chemical science company, any material science company, if they're paying any attention at all, they've got a division that is focusing on graphene.
You know, Ohio State's materials research,
that's a great
on it?
question. I haven't looked into it at all. I don't know.
I did some inquiry. I know that Cornell, where I went to school, has some materials experts focusing on it. I mean, a while ago when it was being researched, they wanted it to be the new silicon, and it's clearly not. So it's taking on a life of its own. I mean, for instance, if you put graphene in silly putty, it becomes a heart rate monitor. If you put graphene in concrete, good things happen. So in a way, what we want to do is kind of open source the inquiry phase, because someone put chocolate and peanut butter and call it a Reese's Pieces cup, and that created a new brand. So that's what we're trying to do, and that's where the blockchain comes in, is because all that inquiry happens in a very distributed, dispersed way rather than in any one lab. So yes, there, I would imagine Ohio State has some interest going on. It's just we haven't fully identified where that interest is coming from yet.
When I was here, there was a lot of focus already on carbon nanotubes, and I was involved in some of that. So I know that at the very least, that is definitely a focal point. I would be shocked if there isn't even more focus on graphene, because it's even more resilient, or had more diverse applications.
So I might just have a clarifying question, or it might be a real question. Let's go on that walk together. So,
okay.
Back to what his question was just a minute ago about the reusability of it after you've kind of done that purpose, and you're saying it's all carbon, so theoretically it should be easy to reverse engineer. Is that kind of the message you're trying to give out? Because it sounds very difficult, and I think could you?
No, that's an excellent question.
Can I jump in a little bit?
Yeah, please.
So with this new process, specifically, creating this stuff called flash graphene, the idea is that it is just the building blocks of graphite. Mm-hmm. So it's going to stay on the planet in the same way that graphite will. So it's not necessarily, taking carbon and turning it into petroleum.
Well, no. I even just mean though, have it be carbon, have it do this one purpose, but now I don't need that product. Now it's not something we're doing. We found a new way to make it even more efficient. And it's if you go all in on all of it and you don't know any of the possibilities of like the opportunities to reverse it.
Yeah.
If like say there aren't as many as you think, then it's like, oh, there's all this excess.
Well,
What's
I think
the transition.
Yeah, no, I love the way you're thinking. The way that I look at everything, life, and I'm an engineer. I'm constantly building things. Everything is a balance of trade-offs, right? There is no magic cure that is going to be the fix-all for everything. And graphene itself, it's not a one side. It's not a magic fix. I mean, the thing that I think about is that hexene, which is one of the most toxic, most difficult substances to clean up, right? For sustainability and environmental, hexene is a perfect ring of carbons, and it's very closely related, and there are definitely going to be side effects that that it's our job to work through each of these things and figure out. So what do we do with the waste? What do we do with the substance once it's been used? Asbestos was a miracle insulator until people realize, oh, wait a second, it starts to break down and you can breathe it in and can't get rid of it. So these are all the kinds of things that you always have to keep in mind. And so it actually brings me to a related project that is also another blockchain project, and it is called the Autonomous Collaboration Engine. And it's a technology that I've been working on for about 20 years. It was actually the beginnings of it. I was applying it in that construction use case. But it allows groups of people to solve problems collaboratively and to weigh the pros and cons of different choices. And these are, this is the ever-present situation that we deal with as, anyone who's doing anything in the world. Anything that you do is going to have some impact, whether it's good or bad or neutral, it's going to have some kind of impact. And, the task at hand for this particular technology is to consider all of the different perspectives and all the different potential outcomes for different choices. So it's another blockchain solution that's actually integrated into both of these other projects that I just mentioned. And it's also integrated into a humanitarian project called Global One. It's a platform that allows you to do good in the world, to allow you to input your ideas and your effort to do good in the world around you. So it's another example of it, and you can hear how diverse these projects are.
Yeah.
And the power of the blockchain itself, and I would say also of graphene, is the broad flexibility. Like we have these tools in our toolbox, and you can do amazing things with it. And now it's just a matter of kind of figuring out where the right applications are.
So what they all seem to have in common is a network or group of highly dispersed
Yes.
people working towards common goals.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, even if the common goal is just to be able to make a transaction, right? I mean, that, it could be, the common goal could be that we want to have contracts in place that we can rely on, right? So, but yes, those projects, right, that we just talked about, yes, they each have a very specific set of goals, and we're using the blockchain and variants of the blockchain.
But they don't need thousands of collaborators, they can just have two.
They could have two, sure. Yeah, and the beauty of this, so when I say distributed, I realize that maybe that's worth clarifying too, because distributed, what it means is that you have the technology set, and each of you might have a piece of it. You might have all of it, you might have a small piece of it, but that it all works together for the whole. So that is another commonality for all of these projects, because they're all distributed systems. So, it goes back to this example that I was talking about earlier, that, in most cases, you've got a central server, you've got different clients that communicate with that server. And in this case, it turns that model on its head, because it becomes a server. Everybody becomes a source of the data. And that's the biggest challenge that cryptocurrency faced, because what's going to stop me from faking it and saying, hey, I've got 1,000 Bitcoins, look here, I'm putting them out into the network, right? You know, and that's, and there's another, it's called the double spending problem. Where I say, okay, I'm gonna give you 100 Bitcoins, I'm also gonna give you 100, I'm gonna give you 100, right? Because I have 100 Bitcoins, so I can fake that transaction 3 or 4 different times on the network. Everybody thinks that they got Bitcoins from me, but they haven't validated with each other yet. So then everybody's standing there with this conflict, and I just walked away with whatever it was that I traded those Bitcoins for. So it's a complex thing, and I'm not going to get into the nuts and bolts of how that is being solved, but that's what the blockchain solves. It gives you confidence that whatever data is present in that network, that you can trust that data, because it's designed specifically to make it so that you cannot forge it, and that's what it's for.
How can you not forge it?
Oh boy. If you really want me to go down that rabbit hole, I will. But,
like, is it just like a 20 character number? Because I could just say I have that 20 character number, or is it some sort of cyber wall?
It is complex. So here's the simplest way I can think of to describe it. The blockchain, you can think of it as blocks of data that are connected to each other. That's why it's called the blockchain. It's a chain of different blocks of data. And each one of these blocks has what I was referring to earlier as the hash. A hash is that string that represents a larger subset of data, or some set of data. It could even be a smaller subset of data. You produce that unique hash that represents that data precisely, and only that data. And each of these blocks have the hash of the preceding block. So that's really how it is protected, because when I create this block, I have the hash of the preceding block that it's connected to. So the only way, if I'm gonna forge this one, I'm gonna have to forge every single block that comes after it. And because it's a distributed data set, that means that I'm gonna have to somehow figure out how to get into every single person's record and update all of those blocks of data. So it becomes exponentially more and more difficult to forge the larger your data set is, because it's intrinsically dependent on the other data that it's connected to. And then blockchain introduces, like Bitcoin and that version of the blockchain introduces other concepts called the proof of work. That's this reverse cracking of, that's what authorizes you to add more data to the network. And they use these pretty clever algorithms to ensure that whoever is doing the most processing power has the rights to control that particular thread that they're adding to. So it uses the constraints of computing processing power as the limiting factor that enforces scarcity in the commodity that we are exchanging. So that's how it works. But again, we've found better ways of doing this since blockchain came out, and there are much more efficient ways of doing it. What we're doing in our own version is, so if you and I are making an exchange, it requires that 2 other nodes check the whatever that transaction is, and that whoever is on both sides of the exchange have to verify it. So it gives you this 4-layer mechanism for validating the data that you're adding to it, and it doesn't require all that computing power, and it relies on the self-interest of the people that are involved to validate the transaction. So it's a much cleaner, simpler way to do it. It's been being proved out in a lot of different systems in Europe. It's actually designed for the Internet of Things, so it's providing a security layer for the distributed technologies that we are increasingly, everybody's got smartwatches and smart everything. It's insane, and that is only going to increase, especially as things like graphene come along and give us the ability to generate electricity from movement, so you can walk around all day and just by your phone bouncing, you're actually charging your phone. And all the way down to the molecular level, you have the ability to actually capture energy in sound waves and heat, and it's amazing where everything's going. And that is only going to lead to more and more digital technology, this micro technology, and a lot of it is networked. So, there's never been, up till now, there hasn't been a mechanism for protecting you. Like your smart devices are sending this information out over Bluetooth or whatever it is that they're using. And so what this particular technology was designed to do is to protect each of those transactions and distribute them and propagate them across this Internet of Things, which is an even more complex, network. But it's just the nature of technology. We are constantly figuring out better and better ways of doing things, and that's never going to stop. So that's just what it all comes down to.
What's the scenario whereby this stuff could be well enough understood by large enough numbers of people that it's trusted?
Well, I think that we're seeing that today. I think, that's why there's so much talk about the blockchain. It's this huge phenomenon that, everybody's realizing, okay, we finally have a way of certifying. I might be working with someone in China. We don't have any common connections. There is no intermediary, but we have this mechanism that we can actually transact business in a way that we both can be confident in that outcome. So I think that we're seeing today, that's why it's, it's being used in energy grids. I think that's one of the most powerful use cases for it. You've got people that are generating, say, solar electricity out of their house, right? And you have to have a way of putting that electricity in the grid and making it available and tracking not only the total amount of electricity that is available, but who produced it, how it was produced. The idea of wanting to only purchase energy that's produced through clean resources like wind or solar. This gives us a way of time stamping for every kilowatt second of energy that's created, right? Every unit of electricity, you can actually time stamp it. You can designate where it came from, what the mechanism that was used to generate it, and you can also use it as a basis for transacting back into the network or selling it to your neighbor. It's amazing. Like some of the use cases for this stuff is truly amazing.
Can you label every electron? Is that what you're saying?
If you really wanted to, sure. Then you're dealing with the scalability of the true scalability of the system. But yeah, you could do this at whatever fine-grained level you wanted to. It's just a matter of what's the overhead of each of those transactions. And again, this is where Bitcoin really stumbles in the blockchain, the way that it has used in that case, where it stumbles because you're limited by 7 transactions per second for the entire network. And that you can see, you can't measure every electron using that mechanism. But using something like the IOTA tangle, absolutely, because it becomes exponentially more efficient the more transactions that happen, because the more nodes that there are, because you have more and more throughput. It's like you're running things in parallel instead of having this being a bottleneck. So with those kinds of technologies, yeah, it's really theoretically scalable infinitely. It's just a matter of, the constraining factor at that point is how much energy and resources does it take to propagate the data across the network. And that's the challenge that we're dealing with today. But we've got great solutions for it. So it's really a pretty amazing time to be doing this.
What is the technology barrier for it? Because I've heard an application is agriculture, certifying where your coffee beans come
Yeah.
from. So obviously that's a pretty distributed supply chain. So how do you
Yes.
ensure that the coffee farmer, do they have to have
Awesome
the Bitcoin
questions.
technology or the blockchain
Yes.
technology?
So, and this is where, I think a lot of people are getting the idea that the blockchain is this magic thing that you can just throw at a situation and magically fix it. And it's definitely not, because you have to have at every point, and Neil and I were talking about this a little while ago. So say I certify that something, say I've got this bottle that has got the beans in it that I harvested from your farm, right? We have to, at at every single point in that supply chain, you have to add a record to that, or I mean, that's really where the power of this comes into play. So when you pick the beans, you know, you have to track that at some level. It has to be added to the blockchain at that point, or else you miss that really crucial step in the supply chain. The next thing is you have to protect the integrity of whatever that thing is. You might have a bushel of coffee beans, right? You know, but what is preventing, and maybe it's got maybe it's certified, it's got a really nice shiny QR code on it, and you know, you can look it up in your system and everything. What's gonna prevent me from undoing a couple threads of the bag, emptying it all out and replacing it with something else, right? I mean, you still have to have you have to have that level of control at every single step, or else those are weak points in your supply chain. So you're right, every single point of transaction, if you're really utilizing the blockchain to its full capacity, you should be tracking and measuring, you know, and recording every single aspect of that, so that, you know, because it's only as good as the data that you're validating.
So does it have a QR code, or is it like?
It could.
Yeah, so how do you track it?
Yeah, so, and that totally depends on the particular blockchain or the technology that you're talking about. So like with Bitcoin, it all comes down to, you know, you've got a wallet, right? So you've got this, and what a wallet is, it's an encrypted version of a storage mechanism for whatever your coins are. So like all your transactions that are specific to you, you've got this digital hash that represents you, and then it maps to that specific wallet. So if you make a transaction with someone else, your wallet is communicating with their wallet, and you're managing that transaction. You're sending the request to make that transaction to the Bitcoin network. So it goes to these mining networks, and whoever happens to mine that Bitcoin next, they include that transaction with that entry in the ledger, and it gets stored in the ledger. So, you know, in that particular case, yeah, I mean, you could use QR codes for it. The QR code's really all that it is. It's a way of, and does everybody know what a QR code is? So it's like, it's those blocky squares that you see, you know, on things. You know, it's usually got like 3 points on it. It's a square, and you've got a bunch of, they're kind of ugly, but they're a way of scanning that two-dimensional image, and it translates it into a string. So you can use a QR code to look up something on the internet, use a QR code to install an app, you can use a QR code to look up information or to send data to somebody. The QR code is just the mechanism for that. And we are using QR codes for, for all of these projects actually, but we're using near field, like NFID, we're using, so the mechanism for transmission, we're gonna come up with more and more technologies as we go. I mean, I think that it's inevitable that we're gonna have, technology is gonna be so intermeshed with how we deal with the world, we won't even be able to differentiate anymore, because, the QR codes, technology is really, it's clunky until it's not, and then it's perfectly seamless, right? The ideal technology is an extension of your will, really. So, that's ultimately where it's heading. But in the meantime, we have QR codes, we have, all different ways of representing all this stuff. I think, the age that we live in, I think that these concepts are going to become more and more important, because it's really going to come down to, this is how we identify ourselves in the world now with, social media, and say, how do you demonstrate without any shadow of a doubt that something you said was in fact you? We're living in an era now where, and maybe you guys have seen this, if you have enough video of someone, you can actually compile a brand new video of them doing and saying essentially whatever you want them to be saying. So we're at the point now where people can forge what other people are saying. People can create video of you doing things that you never did, you saying things that you never did. And you know, in the world as it's becoming more and more complex, and we're having more and more of these exchanges with people that we don't know, we have no knowledge of who these people are a lot of the time on the other side of exchanges that we have. And so this is where like the blockchain and related encryption technologies is what it's going to become more and more crucial, because it's going to be how you defend your personal identity, how you interact with other systems, and you know, I think it's eventually going to become, you're not going to be able to function in our society without these kinds of digital fingerprinting kinds of things. So it's a very interesting time. But yeah, I mean, this kind of technology, keep your eye on it, because it will have an effect on your life. I guarantee you that.
We're not over class yet, but maybe getting to the point where we should think about some wrap up. What